Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of The Late Sub. It is Monday, March 4th, as we are recording right now. We have a big U.S. Women's National Team game to talk about, dig into what we saw, really interesting stuff from them this week, and then we'll do a quick look at the end of the college basketball regular season. We have some superlatives to give out, some congratulations. We saw some confetti. We saw some nets being cut down, but then no rest for the weary. We're jumping right into the postseason in what could be one of the most competitive March Madnesses ever. Let's dig in. So, good news for U.S. Women's National Team fans. They are through to the semifinals of the Gold Cup with a relatively dominant 3-0 win over Colombia. Big bounce-back game for the United States after that surprising loss to Mexico at the end of the Gold Cup group stage. The goal scorers were Lindsey Horan, Jaedyn Shaw, and Jaedyn Shaw. All three of those goals came in the first half. They did also just defend that well in the second, keeping a clean sheet in Alyssa Naeher's 100th cap. Let's dig in. I actually really enjoyed this game for a number of different reasons. It was kind of a funny game. It was not particularly well officiated. There was quite a bit of gamesmanship, you might even say, on both sides, but definitely on Colombia's side. And in that respect, I think we got a really good glimpse of what the U.S. is capable of in terms of mentality, focus, and work ethic when plan A kind of blows up, which is not exactly what we saw in that game against Mexico. It will be presented as a bounce back, and we're going to dig into what exactly that means. Because I think in terms of broad strokes, definitely an emotional bounce back, a mental bounce back. In terms of intangibles, I think there were some very clear leadership moments from the group on the pitch. I think we saw energy rise. We saw the team approach the physicality well. And all of those things, I think, are the most important parts of a short tournament bounce back from a game that they had played earlier that week. They're not given a lot of time probably to make huge tactical changes. There were a significant amount of personnel changes as we've seen throughout the tournament. So let's dig in. So first things first, I'm going to just start with the starting 11. We'll get into what we saw from personnel a little bit later because there was a lot of things to like. But just to sort of set the scene, we saw another bit of heavy rotation. I think that's going to continue throughout the tournament by necessity. I don't think the U.S. is going to be able to settle in on one starting 11 due to the nature of sort of fitness in a tournament this tight. But obviously there were many things that did not work on Monday against Mexico, and therefore they did not use the time off to re-put out that lineup. They made some changes. So Alyssa Naeher started in goal. Jaedyn Shaw, Naomi Girma, Alex Morgan, Jaedyn Shaw, Lindsey Horan, Tierna Davidson, Corbin Albert, Sam Coffey, Trinity Rodman, and Emily Fox. So this was significant in two ways. One being that we got we saw the team get younger again. We saw Corbin Albert, Sam Coffey back out there, Jaedyn Shaw getting Naomi Girma back out there, Jaedyn Shaw. I think at this point in the tournament, this is not only figuring out the different pieces for these younger players, but also just based on truly what we've seen, small sample size, 3 games, just these 3 games. Imagine we had not heard of any of these players ever before. 3 games, this feels like a stronger starting 11 than what we saw in the Mexico game based on the minutes that we've seen in 2024. The game itself, kind of strange. If you watched it, you maybe have a sense of sort of the uneasiness that came when it felt like the ref wasn't really in control of the match. If you did not watch it, you might have also gotten that impression just from what was happening on social media. There were some really funny GIFs, videos coming out. There were dust-ups between U.S. players and Colombia players. The U.S. was awarded a PK in the 10th minute. It took 3 minutes for them to actually take it because there was a lot of shenanigans in the box. I think those kinds of things in a game like this, and let's call this a game of high magnitude for 2 reasons. One being that it's a knockout stage game in a competitive tournament. Big deal. But also in terms of the U.S., I think probably placed a certain amount of pressure on themselves to give a good showing after the showing against Mexico last Monday. So I think there was internal pressure and external pressure. I don't always know if the right response to like gamesmanship or to feeling like a ref is out of control of a match is to up the energy. I think you need some of that, right? I think you need to use it as a focusing agent. You need to use it as something that kind of heightens your awareness, not only for competitive reasons, but also just to stay safe, because when a ref has lost control of a match, the burden is placed on the players to take care of themselves, and that's incredibly unfair. I don't think they should have to do that. But I think what we actually saw, and maybe going to that opening penalty kick, you've probably seen the videos, you've probably seen the memes, but I think there's some serious moments in there that are important, right? So Alex Morgan earns a penalty. In the context of the greater game, it's somewhat surprising that penalty was given. There were not many fouls called in this game, or well, actually there were quite a few fouls called in this game. Could have been many more. Definitely felt it was a little bit unkind to the US in general, but I also think that they just needed to find their way into the game. This penalty is called. Alex Morgan immediately picks up the ball. She's surrounded by many Colombia players who are they're crowding the penalty spot. They're trying to make Morgan uncomfortable. Morgan may be the ostensible penalty taker. They're not giving her a lot of space. They're trying to take the ball away from her. The ref is doing a bad job of controlling things. The ref is trying to take the ball because that's like an element of control. Alex Morgan's like, no, penalty taker holds the ball. That's how this works. Trinity Rodman and Sam Coffey come in to kind of escort the Colombia players out of the box. The ref doesn't really essentially do that herself. All of this is an important ecosystem to how a penalty kick is converted, because you can't leave your teammate on an island. You have to always make your teammate feel like they are being supported, you have their back. You don't want the other players to kind of be getting in their head too much. To be honest, there was also a strange moment when the penalty kick was about to be taken that a Colombia player ran into the box. That was not disciplined in any way. It was kind of a free for all. So all of this happens. We've got Morgan, we've got Coffey, we've got Rodman kind of taking care of this penalty spot, and then at the very end, Morgan gives the ball to Lindsey Horan. Horan walks up, sets the ball down, sinks the penalty. That was great from Alex Morgan. That's like, again, one of those intangible. That's why you have someone like Alex Morgan on the field. She could have taken that penalty. She sunk a penalty earlier in the Gold Cup. But maybe she was there to absorb that pressure, that energy in a game that already felt like it was kind of out of control. And then all Lindsey Horan had to do was take the ball and sink it, and she does. And so, again, in a small tournament format, I think it's tricky to talk about executing necessarily significantly better, because I don't think there's enough time to train on the philosophies or like the principles that you want to play for. But those moments matter. Tournaments are chaos. Competitive tournaments are chaos, and you have to weather the storm. And so I think for the US, yes, they got into it with Colombia when they were kind of pushing for position on set pieces. We saw Rodman really kind of hold herself back. I actually think in a lot of ways this was a huge growth game for Trinity Rodman. But we've also seen how that energy can go poorly. In the Mexico game, even, I think the U.S. was a lot more concerned about what the ref was doing necessarily than what Mexico was doing. They were looking for calls, and they didn't feel like they were getting them, and they were getting pushed off the ball. And I think Mexico was playing perfectly well within their game plan, and I think the U.S. got distracted. I think we've also seen, I think people go back to that Netherlands game in 2023 where Lindsey Horan got into a slight emotional altercation with Danielle Van de Donk and had to kind of be reined in. They said, you saw Julie Ertz kind of being like, focus in, turn this into a competitive advantage. Don't get thrown off your game. Lindsey Horan does that. She scores an equalizer. So I don't think it's good for the U.S. necessarily to feel like this game gave them a competitive edge. I think it more just unearthed some of the competitive edge, the maturity, and the fearlessness that I think they have, and especially that particular starting 11 has. But I do now, kind of moving out of the emotions of it, I want to talk about the approach a little bit. The approach against Mexico didn't work, right? And they're playing a different team in Colombia. But like I said, with a tournament of this speed, you're getting a new opponent days before you're playing them. You're not going to be able to make huge opponent specific adjustments, especially with a group that is kind of in this preseason form. They haven't had a lot of time together. But they did make some changes in this game versus the Mexico game, and they worked really well. They moved back kind of to this sturdy 4-2-3-1. They had Corbin Albert lined up next to Sam Coffey in the defensive midfield. They had that extra presence there to kind of force turnovers, move the ball quickly. But this was, I think, the Colombia-specific approach, which is that they were very concerned with containing Linda Caicedo, who is an incredible player on the Colombian side. She generated a lot of their attack on Sunday. And so basically, they just wanted to make sure that Emily Fox in the defense was not ever put into isolation against Caicedo. She always had a buddy. She always either had Albert or Coffey. doing help defense against a player of that quality, and that worked well. Caicedo is going to get her shots. She's going to get her looks. She's too good to be contained 100% of the time, but it was more forcing Colombia into being predictable in their attacking patterns and isolating that one player to make sure that no one ever felt like they were in a position to get burned. That was smart, I thought. But also, if you kind of looked at the box score of this game versus the Mexico game, if you were just looking at stats, the U.S. connected fewer passes against Colombia. They had lower passing accuracy. They held onto the ball less. They did not really possess the ball very much. You would look at it and be like, wait, which was the better performance technically, in the technical football element? And I think, again, just the good lesson learned from that Mexico game, especially with the personnel that they put out on the field, is sometimes in a tournament of this stature, being purposeful in your movements, purposeful in your defensive plan, harassing a team on the ball rather than letting them do that to you can be more fruitful than kind of going in with this game plan of, no, we're going to build out of the back and we're going to, again, institute these principles that we maybe haven't had a lot of time to focus on. You're in the quarterfinals of a tournament. I think at this point you're seeing your evaluation, but now this is just about, I think, getting as good as results as possible, especially when we saw kind of how emotionally devastating that loss to Mexico was. I think it's smart. They put the pressure on Colombia early. They did a really strong defensive press. They generated turnovers. I do think that penalty call early on really changed the face of the game. I think that rocked Colombia off of their game plan, which is, again, I think why we saw a lot of this gamesmanship. I think that the response to adversity there from Colombia could have been steadier, could have been calmer, been more methodical, get into the spaces where you know that you're dangerous and take your shot. We didn't see that. So the U.S. got a chance to make those purposeful changes, get the turnovers, and execute on the slim chances that they got. And I do think, credit to that, let's go to personnel. I think that's where you look at, okay, this is starting to look like in 2024. Like I said, let's forget anything about these players, anything they've done before, anything that we know them for in the past. Let's talk about just 2024. This is starting to look like some of the strongest players that you want in the mix for your starting 11 for the U.S. women's national team. I already think I maybe already mentioned Jaedyn Shaw. She was incredible. Even if she hadn't have gotten on the score sheet, she did score the team's third goal. Talk about purposeful play. The way she moves the ball always has an end goal that makes sense. I think you can tell that she and Alex Morgan play together on the same club team. Those two play really, really well together. And we'll get to Alex Morgan in a second, but this is how a system and a personnel setup can impact multiple players. Those two understand each other's movements, and that was so important. It also gave Rodman a chance to kind of thrive on the wing. She got to stay wide a little bit more. Because there was Shaw drifting centrally. Shaw is really comfortable moving into central positions. She plays off of Morgan well. We talked last week about how Shaw has to be on that short list for the Olympic team. I don't know who moves her, to be completely honest. At this moment, if she keeps playing at this and keeps developing, as I think people expect her to, because she is still so young, this is a player you have to have in the mix. And it's not only because she's talented, but it's because of the tenaciousness, the tenacity and the fearlessness that she plays with as well, which we did not see against Mexico on Monday. I think Sam Coffey showcased what she is really good at. She is a player that has not gotten as much time with the United States as she does with her club team, Portland. She works really well in a double pivot. I'm not sure at this moment it would be set up to thrive alone in a defensive midfield. That's also something that we saw against Mexico on Monday. She is a converted defensive midfielder. People might not know that. She played forward when she was younger, and she played attacking midfielder in college. She is a relatively recent defensive midfielder conversion when she went to the pros in 2022. I think that's right. 2021, 2022, one of those years. And I think you can see that she sometimes doesn't always get the angle exactly right in defensive positioning, which makes sense. She's a converted defensive midfielder. But when she's on the ball, her passing is immaculate. And so I'm really interested in how the U.S. can best utilize a player like that, where they know, okay, she might need a little bit more, again, that sort of help defense, either from the outside backs or from a defensive midfield partner. But when we get her the ball, she is going to progress the ball in the way that the US has said that they want to progress the ball. Fascinated. I think she could be so useful to this team. So useful to this team, but it is about just getting the balance right. Maybe you need a ball winner next to her. Maybe you need to concede width, which is not, I think, necessarily what the US wants the most. I mean, I think we saw in that Mexico game, sometimes Emily Fox had to drift in and then they conceded the wings and that wasn't good. So it's just getting that balance right of how do you make sure that Sam Coffey is, again, continuing to develop in her defensive positioning, set up to succeed there. And then how do you get her the ball so that she can cook the way that we know that she can cook on the ball? Those little things are what I think makes the US a fascinating team to be a fan of and to cover, is because they have these different talent potentials. It's just how do you get the most informed people on the pitch and how do you get that balance right? And we haven't always seen that in the last couple of years. Jenna Niswanger, another really, really good game from her. Again, she scored a goal. This is another converted defender. I know that we know that the U.S. maybe relies on those too much, but sometimes that's just the nature of youth coaching, where sometimes your standout players get put closest to goal because you want them to score goals for you. I think she did really well on the left side. I think if you are not naturally a player who has had a lot of coaching and defensive spacing as a youth player, the best thing you can do is be committed to the work rate to get back on defense. And then obviously that strike, I mean, she used to play attacking mid. I mean, she used to play attacking mid. That was an incredible strike. And you want to have that danger from the wings. And some of the best performances we've seen from the United States in general in 2024 is when the wide players get involved, but not from drifting too central, getting too narrow. So really, really nice game from her. That kind of idea of these young players not only having these different skill sets that could be assets to the team, but like I said, going back to that big picture of they were fearless and they stayed calm. I mean, you saw it was there was a free kick at the end, I think of, it's at the end of the first half. And there was a Colombian player on the ground and the ref again was having a lot of trouble of keeping control of the match. And it's not like the US was engaging. They actually weren't. They were kind of just focused on what they were doing. They were unfazed, just kind of standing there waiting for at some point the ability to put the ball back into play. I think honestly their greatest frustrations, especially in that second half, was just feeling like they were afraid of getting hurt, which I fully understand. Niswanger was right there, unfazed, not worried, just going to do my thing. And I'm going to score a sick goal with my left foot. And I think that, again, talking intangibles in a tournament setting, that's really important. But let's talk about the veterans. So I already talked about what I really liked from Alex Morgan in some of the non-soccer play in this game, of which there was a lot. There was a lot of not soccer in this game. And I think, again, just sort of reflected by the box stats. Disjointed game, very physical. It was a lot about just sort of staying the course and taking your chances, essentially. But also we saw Morgan do what she does best when surrounded by players, like I think, again, just the interplay with Niswanger, with Shaw, with Rodman. Really, really impressive. I think because there was that dual pivot, we saw players get pushed forward a little bit more. Lindsey Horan was in spaces that she's more comfortable in. And she got stuck in. Alex Morgan did. Alex Morgan, this is going back to 2019. The U.S. does not win the 2019 World Cup without Alex Morgan being like that in the trenches, stuck in back to goal, front to goal, number 9. And we saw vintage Morgan against Colombia in that respect. I also think it's interesting that she so clearly had one of her best performances for the U.S. in recent memory, and she did not score. Which brings me back to, I think, something that we talked about last week, which is Alex Morgan still has a lot to give to this team, but it might be in the concession of understanding that maybe it's not going to be scoring every single time. And that comes into the combination play with the players around her. She's a very kind of help me, help you sort of a player right now. And with Shaw and Rodman and the midfield that they put out, that worked against Colombia. Her input, what she was doing in that game was recognized by the players around her, and they used it to find their own spaces. And I think we did not see that in 2023. Now, the one thing I will concede that I said last week that maybe hasn't always been true is I said I didn't feel like the number 9 position had to be one where you suffer. Alex Morgan suffered in this game, but it was productive. It was really, really productive. So I feel bolstered in sort of my ongoing thought that Alex Morgan can still be a really important piece, but they have to get the people around her right. And they have to recognize what she's good at right now, which is not sending long balls over the top for her to catch. That's not how she plays anymore. It's not dribbling into spaces that she's already occupying. She herself is not a huge dribbling player, which is very different than some of the other forwards that the U.S. Has right now. How do you utilize your players that are fast and good on the ball? And how do they utilize her positioning and sort of, again, that dirty work on the front line to open up spaces for themselves? That did not work last year. But I don't think that was necessarily because of Alex Morgan's skill set. It was about that balance. And I just don't think there's anyone who can. I mean, I go back to the 2022 CONCACAF World Cup qualifying when they played Canada in the final, and that game was for an automatic Olympic qualifying spot. And just the game that Alex Morgan played in that game, she's so good against regional competition. She understands it. She understands it so implicitly, and I think that that was shown perfectly in this match. And then I also want to mention Alyssa Naeher. Now, I want to be clear about this. I've said this twice. I didn't want to see a ton of Alyssa Naeher in the group stage. I stand by that. That's not because I don't think Alyssa Naeher is good. It is because I felt like other players need game time to see what they can do. But again, talking about personnel, balance, system, how the U.S. can use these veterans to their advantage, Naeher had a great game against Colombia. She had a number of really, really important saves to keep it at a clean sheet for the U.S., which when you're playing this mental game, like I said, not a lot of soccer in this soccer game, those moments are huge. One of these shots from Colombia goes in, completely different game. But I think I still stand by Naeher is a player that needs a system. She needs a defense in front of her. I've watched Naeher for many, many years. I'm based in Chicago. I've covered the Red Stars for a long time. There was a time when Naeher was younger, when she was playing for the Boston Breakers, when she was sort of that stand on your head bailout kind of a goalie, where she is an incredible natural shot stopper. And she was the kind of player that even if you were really disorganized in the back, you knew that just because she was a very, very talented shot stopper, she was going to be good for some goals to the good, right? As she's gotten older, and actually just as she has become a more nuanced goalkeeper, I think that Naeher is a player that thrives with controlled chaos in front of her, which is why maybe you saw in that Mexico game where it did not feel like the center backs were on the same page. She had trouble. I mean, there's also just only so much a goalkeeper can do. But Naeher is still so good. And it is great to see that she can still do it. I think age is a factor, but she's so good at shots that are difficult but logical. You look at the shots that she stopped against Colombia. You saw the recovery runs being made by the defense in front of her. And she is a clinical player. If you asked her about certain shots, certain saves, she'll talk about the recovery angle of the defender in front of her, the attacking angle of the player with the ball, the attacking angle of the players not on the ball. And she's calculating all of those to make kind of the best predictive movements to be ready to save a shot, which is why she is so good when the defense is able to make sure that these teams have to shoot from a slight distance, because she's given time to see all of these things put together. And so that center back pairing of Tierna Davison and Naomi Girma did that beautifully in this game. Those shots that Naeher saved were really good shots, and they were in dangerous positions. It was good ball progression from Colombia, but they were logically based around where the U.S. defense was, how much time the attacking player had on the ball, and how much time Naeher had to make those mental calculations. What you didn't see was, for example, a bad back pass that Naeher wasn't expecting, or a turnover right at the top of the box that doesn't give the goalkeeper time to react. Or one thing that I was just struck by both Davidson and Girma is Colombia did try some of these kind of probing long balls, these directional switches. They were so good in the air. They did not let those kind of lobbed balls get past them, get into the box, get into a free runner. It's those kinds of mistakes. It's that kind of breakdown of the defense in front of her that leaves Naeher on an island and doesn't set her up to be her best self. And so when people make declarative statements like Alyssa Naeher proved why she should still be the U.S. number one in this game, I think, I think she's great. I don't think the issue was ever necessarily form in the US system. We've seen her struggle with her club team, but I think it's because of all those other factors that I just described. It is more like who's in front of her, how are they playing, what is the setup, are the outside backs staying home, are they drifting centrally, do they need to go into the midfield to help in the midfield, what is the spacing? And if the spacing is sound, yeah, Naeher is going to be a great goalkeeper every single time. So that's my piece on the veterans. I just really think when we get into these conversations of we need veteran leadership, the team needs new different styles of play. They want to change the way they play. They don't look mentally focused. They don't look, all of these different things. I think it does just come down to the setup and the personnel and that balance. And so this was that good, balanced team for that game. But let's look ahead. I'm off my soapbox about the United States women's national team and what we saw in that game, because it's again, small sample size. I don't know actually what's going to happen in the semifinal against Canada. They'll be playing Canada on Wednesday. The other semifinal will be Mexico against Brazil, which will also be a banger. I'm excited for that one. The U.S.'s first touches still didn't look amazing individually. They still just don't look that sharp on the ball on their own. There were a few botched chances in front of goal. We did see that. A couple missed chances to truly put the game away in the second half, forcing them into just sort of quieting the game down for the entire second 45 minutes. There's also the element, I mentioned this at the top of the show, they're not going to be able to keep this lineup on Wednesday just because of the fitness issue. They're going to have to rotate. They don't have a choice. So I think the fans are going to have to be patient with that. This the nature of this tournament. They can't just run the same 11 back out. That wouldn't be good for the players long term. And also, Canada is a very different team than Colombia. I think Canada, we've seen the U.S. take the approach in the Andonovski years that you push them into a corner with stout defense. You don't give them a lot of attacking looks. You grind it out, keep the score low, and then again, take your chances and get a low-scoring game against them, because I think if you can neutralize the attack first, then you can work on their defense, which is very good and always has been. So things are looking up for the U.S. Measured praise, perhaps. I think that they deserve the praise the most for the thing that they get criticized for a lot, which is the mentality. The mentality, the intangibles, the leadership, all of that. I think they did a nice job of keeping their cool. Trinity Rodman's work rate on that third goal is like the reason she was able to get subbed out and wasn't in danger of getting a second yellow in the second half. It's those little things. They make a huge difference. And they're the things you look back on when you calculate success. So a lot better from the U.S. I think one little note I want to hit on the U.S. before we move on is we did also see outside of this tournament, we saw the return of Catarina Macario. Really exciting. This is a player that hasn't played professional soccer in a game since like June 2022. Just lingering issues with that ACL tear. I think people know, if you have an injury of that stature, sometimes it can mean that there is scar tissue issues. We've seen players deal with that. For other teams, sometimes it means that you can have balance issues where you need to be careful not to hurt something else while you're rehabbing something like a knee. And she scored. She scored like 5 minutes in, 4 or 5 minutes, 6 into her subbing into the game. Really, really exciting to see for the U.S. Macario's back. Again, I'm anticipating we'll see Mallory Swanson weekend 1 in the NWSL. There's other players who have something to say about this Olympic roster outside of these Gold Cup performances. And I hope that for people at the very least, here's my final pitch. If the U.S. isn't always going to be good, I would like them to be interesting. And I thought they were really, really interesting on Sunday. And I can't wait to see what they do on Wednesday. All right, real quick, we're going to switch over to the world of college basketball because the regular season is over. If you can believe it, the regular season for the 2023-2024 women's basketball season has ended. So we have some superlatives to give out, some congratulations, a tip of the cap to strong regular seasons from a lot of different teams before we get into the postseason. As we know, the history is written by the victors of the postseason, but I think that these regular season accomplishments are equally as interesting because I think these are really, really difficult conferences to get through. So first, congratulations to the number 1 South Carolina Gamecocks, undefeated for the second straight year. Truly incredible after replacing their entire starting lineup. They're a very, very different team that has found their way through different games in different styles, different ways. I thought Dawn Staley's energy this week was really interesting. I think she's very, very proud of her group, but I think she is taking what I think is a very smart tact, which is that she's not going to add any pressure onto their plates. They play very free. They play very loose. She joked about kind of the seriousness levels in the locker room from last year to this year. She described it last year as like a doctorate program, and this year a little bit more like daycare. It's a young team, it's a loose team, it's a good group. I think you just can't say enough what the addition of Tahina Pau as a transfer to this starting lineup, what that did for them in terms of stretch shooting and forcing teams into different defensive schemes to try to deal with a team that can both shoot on the outside and dominate in the paint. I think I said this before. I think this is something that Staley touched on this week. I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see in the postseason if, quote unquote, the South Carolina would have been better off with a loss in the regular season. Obviously, the undefeated season is incredible, but I think for a team that doesn't place that pressure on themselves, I hope that they retain not putting that pressure on themselves in the postseason. Because I do think that it's hard to have now maybe your first L lesson possibly being in a win or go home scenario. So I'm fascinated to see how they make those adjustments, those in-game adjustments. I still think that they are the team to watch, the team to beat, overall number one seed for NCAA and the SEC tournaments, but a huge accomplishment for them. And I love that they did it by staying true to themselves and succeeding while keeping the pressure off. I think that's so hard to do, and it's a testament to the players and to that coaching staff. Congratulations once again to Caitlin Clark. I think we're going to be congratulating Caitlin Clark for many months to come. She is now the leading scorer in NCAA Division I history. She passed Pete Maravich's record that was set in 1970. She set that on Sunday in a really important game. They beat number 2 Ohio State. Iowa did. Ohio State had already wrapped up the regular season Big Ten title, so this was not necessarily for a trophy, but this could make it really interesting when we look at NCAA tournament seeding coming out of the Big Ten tournament. It's possible that these two teams will play each other again this week, and then looking at who makes that jump to a number 1 seed. And the seeding is going to be pretty important this year because you're going to have some really good teams waiting in the wings, lurking in these lower seeds. You're going to want to get an advantageous route. I think that is going to be really, really important this year. Also going to Clark, there was a big celebration on Sunday, senior day at Iowa, because she did declare this week that she will be going to the WNBA, which I think is absolutely the right call. She's going to have a great setup with the Indiana Fever, who have the number 1 pick. She's staying in the Midwest. Her legacy at the collegiate level is set, and I do believe that actually making that legacy greater would not be served by staying. I think it would be served by going. And so it was a huge celebration, huge win over a good team, breaking that overall record. And I also found interesting that the Wall Street Journal did a report this week. They were talking about, people talk about whether Caitlin Clark taking a pay cut by going to the Dub. Her national sponsors are going with her, according to the Wall Street Journal. She's already right now in a bidding war to be re-signed by Nike. I think people have seen some of the really cool Nike activations surrounding Clark. They're trying to win her back. And the reporting is that we're looking at possibly a multi-million-dollar deal. So Clark, it's so interesting. She's so successful on the court, but I wonder when all's said and done, if what she'll be remembered for might be off it. I don't know. But I'm so excited to see her in the WNBA. I think she's going to be fantastic. Can't wait to see her play with Aaliyah Boston. We're all assuming that Indiana's the end goal, but I can't wait to see it. And I think that making that call, making the declaration before senior day so that everyone can celebrate that, making the declaration before both the conference and the NCAA tournaments is a baller move, to be honest. Like, very confident. She knows what she wants. She gets it out of the way so she and her team can just focus on ball. Really, really liked it. Congratulations to Stanford, who won the Pac-12 regular season title in one of the most competitive seasons for the conference in recent memory. Also, the women's basketball regular season for the Pac-12 as it currently exists. I think the kudos has to go to Cameron Brink. She's added so many elements to her game, even from last year to this year. And I'm just so impressed with how comfortable she's been. She's always been the center point of this team to a certain extent. Even just sort of in her position, how she plays in the post roll in the paint is so important. But she is like the center point of this team this year. And her comfort level with being that player for her teammates and carrying the program on her shoulders in some ways really impressive. She has not decided whether or not she's going to the dub, but I hope that she does because I think she's ready and I want to see her. I want to see her at the pro level. Instant impact, I think it's going to be. It's a shame what conference realignment has done to the Pac-12, but I also take some solace in just what an incredible regular season we saw from that group, because those are some teams that you're going to want to pick in your bracket busters for March Madness. Real quick, congratulations to Virginia Tech, who won the ACC. They've had kind of a strange week. They win the ACC regular season title. That was another very competitive conference. And then they promptly lose 2 games in a row. And I think probably what they're worried about the most, I'll go back to Iowa here for a second as well. There were a couple of knee injuries in the final weekend of the regular season that we're recording this on Monday. Maybe we'll get some insight onto those. Hopefully they're not as bad as perhaps they looked. But going back to Iowa, their starting point guard, Molly Davis, went down with what looked like a pretty serious non-contact knee injury in that game. Virginia Tech lost Elizabeth Kitley to a knee injury in their game this weekend. And Indiana lost Mackenzie Holmes also to a knee injury. No updates on what those are exactly, but also I think any fan of women's sports knows that knee injuries are very tricky, and hopefully they're not that serious. But with a short runway to the NCAA tournament, those moments could be perhaps even just the most impactful out of the weekend when we're looking at starting lineups for some of these teams. Also, just want to shout out Notre Dame having a very strong week. That's a sleeper team as well. Don't let their ranking fool you. That's a team that's going to win some games in the NCAA tournament. And bet, if you're going to bet on anyone, bet on Hannah Hidalgo, because she's a gamer. Conference tournaments begin this week. Then it's time for Selection Sunday. As of right now, ESPN's bracketology has South Carolina, Stanford, Ohio State, and UCLA as their number 1 seeds. This week could kind of make or break that, though. Ohio State suddenly becomes a little bit vulnerable with that regular season loss to Iowa at the end of the regular season. If Iowa beats them in the conference tournament, I think that there's a debate to be made about which team from the Big Ten should be the number 1 seed. I don't know if I completely agree with that. I think Iowa's been a little bit overranked this season. Is that a controversial statement? I don't know. They're very good, obviously, and they have the best offensive player in the country, but they don't seem to. It's interesting how people kind of really rate their wins and rate their losses, because I think Ohio State's body of work is also really interesting. But my whole point is that there's a lot of top teams playing really, really well. If you've listened to this podcast, you're probably thinking to yourself every week, oh my God, talk about somebody else, talk about some of these other teams. There's so many teams that are looking good, looking comfortable, having good chemistry going into the postseason. LSU has looked a lot sharper in the second half of the season. UConn has figured kind of their small ball situation out. Interested to see how they play outside of conference, but that's a team. There are just some individual players on that team I don't know if I would bet against. USC, Juju Watkins. Texas has been very, very good. They did not win the Big 12, which is interesting. It's sort of that push-pull. Oklahoma, their final congratulations to Oklahoma for winning the Big 12. Texas looks like a dangerous team. So this could be one of the most competitive postseasons we've seen in a while. And I just say to everybody, buckle up and best of luck with your brackets. I'll have to share mine once I get mine done, but it's going to be really, really fun, really exciting. But this does leave me to my final thought of the day. Of basketball and soccer. This is just kind of my overarching thought on this Monday afternoon, which is that everybody just get ready for the refs. Get ready for the officiating in the postseason, especially for college basketball here. It came into play with the Clark record-breaking shot for the Pete Maravich record. She broke the record on a technical foul that I personally, this is just my opinion, I thought was soft. It was against Ohio State's Cody McMahon. It was off ball. You can go back and find the replay. I thought it was a bit of a soft call. I was a little bit disappointed how that tech, I think, really kind of mentally shook Ohio State. I mean, I've told you guys I'm a homer on that one. I like the Ohio State Buckeyes, but I was bummed a little bit just how much the refs were involved, not only in sort of the mental game, and also just that record was broken on technical free throws, which she sunk, and full credit to that. But the refs are going to impact the postseason. They always do. I think you can go back even to the Final Four last year. People who we do selective memory, but the refs were very important in both the Final Four semifinals and in the final. Foul trouble is going to be a factor. Jump ball calls are going to be a factor. Get ready for the jump ball rule in college. And I think, tying it back to the US game too, the refereeing was very, very poor in that game as well. Which I think, again, credit to the US for being there to play and not being fazed by it. But at some point, you just started to get really, really concerned for players' health. Things will get physical when players don't feel like the game is under control. To my point being that when you're picking your brackets, when you're watching the games, this is not to call out any individual referees who I think are doing the best with the resources that they have. But as we know, resources for officiating are a constant conversation in this country. There's actually, people might know there's one prominent soccer union right now that's in a lockout over resources and wages. And when resources are put into a sport, put into a program, as we know, a lot of the times it's women's sports that gets less, right? Gets fewer resources. So I am a big believer that officiating improves when you empower the refs to be able to do better. And I also believe that we don't always see that in women's sports. But this is just sort of my fan plea to everybody. Best laid plans in March, best laid plans in these soccer games, but officiating is going to be a factor. And so just kind of buckle up for that, because there's going to be some strange calls, but I can't wait to see it. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I'm your host, Claire Watkins. Shout out to our producer extraordinaire, Parker Fenton. We will have a lot more soccer to talk next week, a lot more college basketball. We're getting into it. The quote-unquote off-season is over. We have some really important games to discuss, and I can't wait to do it. Thank you to everyone who watched, who listened. Keep commenting. We read your comments, and we'll see you next week.